Our second speaker is Alexey Guzey, who is an unaffiliated independent researcher working on meta-science. He's most interested in the organization of life science and the ways people get selected in and out of academia. He writes on his own website and blog, and I'll post a link to that in the chat. His writing has been mentioned in the popular media, including BBC and Wired. And today he's going to be giving a talk titled The Structure of Life Science Academia.
Let me start sharing the screen. So I'm Alexey, and I'm going to be talking about the structure of life sciences academia. And I think that there are a lot of problems in how academia is structured, and I feel like I'm a bit less idealistic than, for example, the organizers of this conference, in that there are certain, a lot of issues, for example, of editorial control, as was pointed out in the introductory session. And the organizers of the conference, for example, decided that the way to deal away with editorial control would be to just anonymize all of the talks and let the algorithm decide what we should, what talks to suggest to us. But it seems to me that you basically outsource the editorial control to algorithm in this way, and people just rely on different ways to source what they're going to be looking at. But the editorial control still is going to be there, and you still will have to make decisions about how to design it. And it's a question of whether it's going to be people or algorithms, or some mixture of it. But this is a more difficult problem that it appears to be, and this is one of the reasons why you can't really just go and destroy all of the journals, for example, and substitute it by archive. But anyway, so my talk is, I'm going to be focusing on three big points in my talk. And the first one that I'm going to cover is the structural rigidity of academia. And one of the ways in which I think academia is very surprising, in that science is built on us proving past scientists, or demonstrating them to be wrong, and us discovering that we were wrong about things. And at the same time, the only way to advance in academia is via getting approved by people who are more senior than you are. If you want to get into grad school, you need to get recommendation letters from professors. In order to get a postdoc and a faculty position, you need recommendation letters, and you need to get published in journals and get approved by people who are more senior than you are. And in order to get its tenure, you need to get even more recommendation letters, so that people would confirm that you're doing interesting work at the frontier of your field. And this contrasts very strongly with how world outside of academia works. And if you think about industry, and if you think that some business is functioning poorly, or there's some people are wrong about something, then there is you can go and raise in some initial amount of capital from a really large selection of venture capitalists or banks who can give that to you, and then you're going to start serving customers. And once you start to serve customers, they're the only people you're dependent on, while academics are well, first of all, it's not even clear who the final customers are, whether it's other scientists, or whether it's the public, or whether it's the funding bodies. And academics are forever dependent on people approving their work, essentially, in order to continue to do their work, which I think is interesting. And yeah, as one physicist I was talking to recently told me that to get a faculty job, you need two things to happen. You need someone who is lobbying for you specifically, and you need everyone else to find you unobjectionable. And this is also interesting because like people who are advancing science the most often are people who are objectionable. It feels like. Then there are like a lot of other ways in which the structure of academia is surprisingly rigid. For example, companies are often founded by several people, like maybe someone is more technical, someone is more social, and people team up and found a company and do the things they're stronger in. And in science, like you are a PI and you're the one head of the lab, you have to fundraise, you have to do science, you have to manage people, you have to hire people, you have to be good at everything. And I would guess that this ends up selecting out a lot of people who would probably be like really good scientists, but who would not be very good at managing people or hiring people or teaching. And uh, yeah, and if we think about the scientists in the past, it seems that quite a few of the greatest scientists were like maybe a little bit autistic or just like autistic, and they would probably like struggle a lot when if they were forced to become a PI. And this is also related to the next point, which is that like because everything is set up, all of the funding structures are set up to make hiring grad students and postdocs, uh, being it very cheap to hire grad students and postdocs, there is really no incentive to ever hire research scientists. And so people who would just make really good research scientists, but not very good PIs, end up uh, having to leave academia effectively. So the next point that I think is very misunderstood by people outside of academia is the risk aversion. So NIH is the primary funder of neuroscience and of life sciences in the US. And naively, it seems that NIH is this giant bureaucratic organization that is really risk averse and really likes to fund incremental research and really doesn't like anything too innovative. But looking closer, like at this, it seems that like even though this is kind of true, in reality, like people find ways around this. And for example, I guess the biggest way is that everyone just lies to NIH, and like people just like say they are going to do one thing, and they are like maybe this is part of what they're going to do, but then they're actually going to do the projects they really want to do. Sometimes people like you do the experiment and you have your results, and then you're about to publish them, and you write a grant like as if you're going to perform the experiments, and then you use that grant to do something interesting. And uh, or sometimes like so as related to this meme, if you want to do something really exciting in some basic research project, I think neuroscience is especially guilty here, because like there are a lot of brain diseases, for example, and we haven't really solved any of them, but you like kind of have to say that, or I'm going to work on this project of how brain circuits in mice models of autism work. And like like the project probably like likely doesn't really have much to do with autism or with depression, at least in the like near to medium term, but you still have to like make it seem as if it's not just a basic science project. And then of course like risk taking is actually encouraged, because like if you're a student you really need to get publications at Cell and Nature and Science and other top journals in order to get faculty positions, and these journals like really like flashy results, which often require you to work on something that is risky. And of course PIs also have some portfolio projects, and have some projects that are more risky, some projects that are more likely to work out. But this is also, especially the point about lying to NIH, also I guess continues the point about selecting some people out, because like lying, like they need to hype up the research and like invent ways to explain it in order and to make it fundable does also like just select people out who find this unpleasant or who are not very good at this, which also probably introduces some structural differences in how science is made versus how like it should be done. Then there is a question of like cooperation in science, and the thing that I think I was most surprised to by like how often people mention this to me, because like again, naively you would have people usually have this idea that industry is like cutthroat and their businesses competing and everyone is individualistic. And then when I like started talking to scientists were like, well, and then like I thought that, and then I went to grad school and it turned out that like grad school is usually a really lonely experience, because if you're a grad student, like and you want to become an academic, then like the only currency that you have are first author publications. And if the only real currency is first author publications, then like it's like really difficult to cooperate on projects. And even if someone has a project that is maybe as interesting as your project or maybe more interesting, but you're not going to be a first author in it, like cooperating on it and like working it, you're still probably not going to give that project as much time as in some utopic system you would. And in contrast to industry, where like, especially if you're working in a startup, like, and everyone has equity, everyone has like, it really is like bound by this in a very tangible way, and in a way that is kind of impossible. This is kind of impossible to do in science. Yeah, and the way I think to try to pull this all together in some synthetic example of, we can try to imagine some like a grad student who like is interested in Alzheimer's disease and who decides that, well, right now other hypotheses are more accepted, but it seems that like 20 years ago, beta amyloid hypothesis was so dominant that you really couldn't work on other hypotheses. And if you were a grad student 20 years ago who's interested in Alzheimer's, and somehow you decided that this is not the right way to think about this problem, there really wasn't that much to do there. You couldn't just like go around the field the way and just like work directly on this. You would have to work with like be a grad student of someone who thinks that this is the right hypothesis. Probably you would like somehow have to figure out how to do that for many years and like to work on projects that you think are probably wrong. And if you just like somehow graduate and try to get funding, then it's going to be really hard, because like senior scientists think that like this is the right way to approach this problem, and they're going to be sitting on NH panels. And this is also just like really, really hard to do. And if you try to do something differently, you're like you're essentially trying to destroy their careers. You've already spent the last 20 years doing is publishing this hypothesis. And
Alexey, you have 1 minute left.
yeah, and as a result, it seems like in a lot of ways science like needs to be like yes and like in order to succeed you have to be like original but not heretical. And yeah, there is a quote about like people trying to work on the field that is captured by other people in the and succeeding, fortunately. But yeah, I think I'm basically done. And I have a lot of more things on this topic on my site, and you can continue reading in my essay. And there's a bunch of memes, but we don't have time for them. Yeah.
All right, that was a great talk, Alexey. Thank you very much for that. So I guess I will ask a question. Short answer question. You can post more in the chat or on Twitter, however you would prefer to respond. In general, I agree with you on most of the points you're making, but I guess do you think that that science right now is structured based on like the Kuhnian kind of revolution perspective, whereby most of us are toiling at a question, or like, and not going to make any progress or make very incremental progress until one person makes, or there is one major scientific discovery that precipitates a revolution that changes how we're all thinking about things. And then everyone will begin toiling away at that level of understanding until we reach the next revolution. Not to say that that's like a good thing, but
so the question is whether I believe that this is how science works.
Whether, yes, I guess it is kind of whether or not that's how science is working. Whether there's an alternative model.
I suspect that this is at least partly how science works, and like that it's like at least it's discontinuous, and like we discover some things that change our perspective more, and we discover some things that change our perspective less, and sometimes we discover things that like demonstrate a lot of other things we believe to be true to be false, and people start to build in the new thing out. But yeah.
Yeah, unfortunately, like the structure of science sometimes makes it seem like whose revolution we follow is who's most popular.
Yeah,
that maybe is the problem. Okay, so we have to move on, but this is a very fun session. I'm really enjoying your talks, and I think the last talk is going to be great as well. It's going to be given by